I thought I was stepping into a dream when I bought a quiet, abandoned mountain house, my chance to escape the chaos of the city. But when I returned to finally bring it back to life, I discovered something I never could have imagined. Someone was already living inside. And not just anyone, the self-proclaimed queen of the local HOA, a woman who had claimed my property as her own. From that moment on, every step I took to reclaim my home became a battle. How far would she go to keep me out? When I first found the mountain house, it looked like something out of a forgotten postcard. Perched on a ridge, hidden behind tall pines and winding dirt roads, it was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a storybook. Quiet, still, and almost untouched by time. The roof sagged, the windows were dusted over, and the walls bore the weight of years of abandonment. But to me, it wasn't just a crumbling house. It was potential, a chance to build a retreat, a sanctuary, a place that truly belonged to me. For months, I dreamed about what it could become. Weekends spent restoring the old beams, mornings sipping coffee with nothing but the sound of wind in the trees. I imagined the peace of finally having space to breathe. No traffic, no noise, no nosy neighbors watching from across the street. Just silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of deer in the underbrush. The town itself was small, almost sleepy, with a charm that seemed frozen in another era. People waved when you passed, and the general store still rang up purchases on an old register. At first glance, it looked like the kind of community where everyone minded their own business. But beneath that quiet surface, there was a different reality, one I hadn't yet seen. A small group of residents had banded together, calling themselves a homeowners association. Out here in the mountains, it seemed almost laughable. What rules could possibly matter in a place surrounded by wilderness? Still, whispers carried through the town, stories of a woman who saw herself as the enforcer of these so-called rules, someone who believed every cabin, every lot, and every newcomer had to fall under her watchful eye. When I signed the papers for the property, I didn't think twice about it. To me, it was just a broken-down house with good bones, but to her, it was something more. A piece of territory she had already claimed without ever owning it. I didn't know it then, but the moment I unlocked that front door, I wasn't just stepping into my new home, I was stepping straight into her domain. At first, I thought the sight of her inside the house was some sort of misunderstanding. Maybe she was a squatter, maybe someone who had just wandered in. But when I confronted her, she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood there with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you own something, even when you don't. She told me, without hesitation, that the house belonged to the HOA and that she was maintaining it in the absence of a rightful owner. Her words chilled me, but at the time, I brushed it off as delusional. Surely, I thought, this was just a matter of calling the sheriff, showing my deed, and clearing things up. What I didn't know was that she wasn't acting alone. Behind her was a group of neighbors who had empowered her. People who actually believed that this forgotten property belonged to their so-called association. The first signs of trouble appeared within days. A letter was taped to the door, written in stiff, legal-sounding language. According to their bylaws, my house fell under the HOA's jurisdiction, even though it was built decades before the association ever existed. The letter listed violations, the overgrown weeds, the crumbling porch, even the non-compliant color of the shutters. At the bottom was a fine, $500 due immediately. It was absurd. The house had been abandoned for years, but somehow I was being penalized for not keeping it in community standards. I laughed at the letter and tossed it aside. But the next day, another appeared. This one warned of further action if I didn't respond. That's when the harassment began. Every time I visited the property, I found some new obstacle waiting for me. Chains strung across the driveway. Warning signs hammered into the trees, declaring the land as private HOA property. Once, I even discovered my locks had been changed. The doors bolted shut as if I were trespassing in my own home. I called the sheriff again and again, but each time the response was the same. This sounds like a civil matter. You'll need to take it up with the courts. And so the woman, Karen, as I came to know her, kept tightening her grip. The more I resisted, the bolder she became. When I tried to clear the weeds, HOA members arrived and photographed me, scribbling notes as though building a case. When I hauled in lumber to repair the porch, I came back the next day to find the boards gone. Tools disappeared. Trash appeared in the yard. Each act was small on its own, but together they formed a relentless message. You don't belong here. Weeks stretched into months. Letters became fines. Fines became threats. And soon I was facing claims of thousands of dollars in violations. According to their paperwork, I owed more in penalties than I had even paid for the property. The absurdity was staggering, but what cut deep deeper was the sense of invasion. This was my home, my escape, and it was being strangled before it could even come to life. The community itself, once charming and welcoming, began to shift around me. Some neighbors avoided me altogether, lowering their eyes when I passed. Others whispered about how the new guy wasn't fitting in. A few even sided openly with the HOA, parroting their rules as if they were law. It was as though Karen had poisoned the air, turning my dream into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. One night, when I arrived to check on the property, I found lights on inside. My heart pounded as I crept closer. Through the dusty windows, I saw her, sitting comfortably in my living room, sipping tea as if she owned the place. Around her were boxes, blankets, even framed photos. She hadn't just broken in, she had moved in. I pounded on the door, demanding she leave, but she only smirked. "You're the trespasser here," she said. "The HOA recognizes me as the rightful occupant." And with that, she shut the door in my face. It was infuriating, but also terrifying. She had crossed from harassment into outright theft, and yet the system seemed powerless to stop her. Every official I spoke to pushed me towards civil litigation, a process that could drag on for years. And all the while, she lived inside the house I had bought, laughing at my frustration. Still, I refused to back down. If she wanted a fight, I was ready to give her one. I began documenting everything. Photos of the damage, records of the fines, copies of every threatening letter. I spoke with lawyers. I dug into the county records, and I uncovered something that made my blood boil. The HOA had no legal authority over my property at all. Their jurisdiction ended miles away. Everything they had claimed was a lie, built on nothing more than intimidation and the community's blind compliance. But knowing the truth and enforcing it were two very different things. As I prepared to challenge them, Karen escalated once again. One morning, I arrived to find a massive notice of seizure nailed to the door, declaring that the HOA had repossessed the property for unpaid dues. The audacity was breathtaking. She had staged her own foreclosure as though she could erase my ownership with a sheet of paper. That was the moment I realized just how far she was willing to go. This wasn't about weeds or shutters. This was about control. She wanted the house, she wanted the power, and she would stop at nothing to take both from me. Each visit became a battle of wills. I'd fix something, she'd undo it. I'd clear the land, she'd dump debris. It was like living in a war zone, except the enemy wasn't faceless. It was a single woman, emboldened by a false crown and a pack of followers who believed her every word. I was exhausted, but I wasn't broken. If she wanted to turn my dream into a battlefield, then so be it. I was ready to fight fire with fire, and that's when I made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the county archives, buried beneath years of dusty records, I found a document that gave me the leverage I needed. A single clause that, if used correctly, could bring her entire charade crashing down. But before I could act, Karen made her boldest move yet. The HOA thought they had me cornered. Karen strutted around the property like she had already won, waving her so-called foreclosure notice in front of neighbors as if it were gospel. She had turned my home into her stage, using every petty rule and fabricated bylaw to humiliate me, and for months I had played defense. But now it was my turn. With the document I had found buried in the county archives, I had the one thing Karen didn't: truth backed by law. The paper was simple, just a few paragraphs long, but it was devastating. It stated in black and white that my property sat entirely outside the boundaries of the HOA's jurisdiction. Their rules had no authority here. Every fine, every threat, every so-called seizure notice, they were all fraudulent. But I didn't want to simply win quietly. After months of harassment, after watching her squat in my house and weaponize her fake authority, I wanted the truth to come out publicly. I wanted everyone in the community who had cowered under her reign to see her stripped of power. So I planned my move. On the day of the HOA's monthly meeting, an event Karen treated like her personal court, I walked into the community hall with a folder tucked under my arm. Karen was already there, holding court at the front, flanked by her loyal board members. The room was packed with residents, many of whom had come just to watch the spectacle. She welcomed me with a smirk, clearly expecting me to be humiliated once again. She began her usual performance, rattling off violations against me, presenting photographs of weeds, trash, and other nonsense she or her cronies had staged. Each accusation was followed by murmurs from the crowd. Then, with theatrical flair, she held up the foreclosure notice and declared that my property had been seized by the HOA. That's when I stepped forward. Calmly, I laid my folder on the table in front of her. The room fell quiet as I pulled out the county records. I read aloud, word for word, the legal description of the HOA's boundaries, and then I read the description of my property, completely separate, completely free. Every eye in the room darted between me, the paper, and Karen, Her smile faltered. She tried to interrupt, tried to shout me down, but I kept reading. With every sentence, her credibility crumbled. I laid out the evidence of her false claims, her illegal fines, even her unlawful occupation of my house. By the time I finished, the room was buzzing, not with support for her, but with anger. Neighbors who had been silent for years now saw the truth. They had been manipulated, bullied, and controlled by someone who never had any real authority. The illusion of her power shattered right there in that hall. Karen turned red, stammering excuses about interpretations and community standards, but it was too late. The sheriff, who I had invited with the records in hand, stepped forward. In front of the entire HOA, he ordered her out of my home immediately and warned that further interference would lead to criminal charges. The hall erupted, not in applause, but in the kind of collective murmur that signals a shift in power. Karen's reign was over, and she knew it. She stormed out, her once loyal board trailing behind her, leaving behind a room full of neighbors who now looked at me not as an outsider, but as the man who had finally stood up to her. For the first time since I had bought the mountain house, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I had reclaimed not just my home, but my dignity. But even then, I couldn't shake the question that lingered in my mind. If one person could manipulate an entire community with nothing but bluster and fear, how many others like her were out there, hiding behind the letters HOA? When Karen stormed out of that meeting, slamming the hall doors behind her, I thought that would be the end of it. I expected her to retreat, lick her wounds, and finally leave me alone. But with people like her, it's never that simple. She had spent years building a little empire of fear and control, and losing it so publicly was something her pride couldn't swallow. In the weeks that followed, she tried to claw her way back into relevance. She whispered to neighbors that my documents were fake, that I had manipulated the county records. She even taped more warning letters to my door, though now they were scrawled by hand, stripped of the legal jargon she once wielded like a sword. But the difference was clear. No one believed her anymore. The very people who once nodded along to her every decree now ignored her entirely. She had gone from queen to pariah in a matter of days. For me, though, the fight wasn't just about silencing her. It was about finally reclaiming the peace I had dreamed of when I bought the mountain house. I poured myself into the renovations, this time without interference. Each board I nailed, each beam I restored felt like more than construction. It was vindication. It was proof that I had won, not just legally, but spiritually. The walls that had once echoed with her footsteps now echoed with mine, and mine alone. But there were consequences for her, too. The sheriff had warned her that her squatting could be grounds for criminal charges. When I pressed the matter, she was investigated, not just for breaking into my property, but for fraud. Those foreclosure notices she had signed, those fines she had demanded, every one of them carried her name. What had started as petty harassment was now being looked at as attempted theft, even extortion. Neighbors who had once followed her blindly were suddenly stepping forward with their own stories. Fines they had paid, repairs they had done out of fear, threats they had received late at night. For years, Karen had held them all under her thumb, and now, one by one, they were testifying against her. The HOA itself didn't survive the fallout. Without Karen at the helm, its flimsy authority collapsed. Meetings stopped. Dues went unpaid. Residents who had once cowered in silence realized they didn't need the HOA at all, and within a few months, it was dissolved entirely. The bylaws, the fines, the endless rules, they vanished, leaving behind nothing but relief. What had once been a community ruled by paranoia slowly became a place where neighbors waved again, where conversations weren't tainted by fear of some looming violation. As for Karen, the last I heard, she sold her house and moved away, unable to face the humiliation of living in the very town she had once dominated. She left behind not just her reputation, but a legacy of bitterness. People spoke of her not with fear anymore, but with a kind of mocking pity. She had built her identity on controlling others, and when that power was stripped away, there was nothing left. For me, the transformation was almost poetic. The mountain house that had once symbolized frustration became my sanctuary. I finished the renovations, restored the porch, cleared the land, and finally, after years of battling for what was mine, I sat on that porch with a cup of coffee in hand, looking out over the valley below. For the first time, the silence was exactly what I had imagined it would be. Peaceful, unbroken, and mine. Still, I couldn't shake a lingering thought. My battle had ended in victory, but only because I had the persistence to fight back and the luck to uncover the right piece of paperwork. What if I hadn't found that document? What if I had given up after the first fine? The first threat, the first night I saw her living in my house. How many people, I wondered, had walked away from their dreams because someone like Karen convinced them they had no choice? The truth is, HOA power doesn't always come from the law. It comes from fear, from the willingness of neighbors to comply without question, from people assuming the rules must be real simply because they're written down on paper with an official-sounding header. Karen never had authority over me, but she acted like she did, and for far too long I let her get away with it. That's the danger. Authority, once assumed, can be just as powerful as authority that's real, and unless someone stands up and says enough, it keeps growing. In the end, the fight for my home wasn't just about property lines or legal documents. It was about reclaiming something bigger, the right to live without being bullied, the right to enjoy what you've earned without fear of someone twisting rules to take it away. And that's what I want people to take away from this story. If you've ever felt trapped under the thumb of an HOA or pressured by a neighbor who acts like they control your life, don't forget that you have rights. Don't forget that their power only works if you believe in it. And most importantly, don't forget that you're not alone. Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and freedom is the courage to fight back. So tell me, what would you have done if you found someone like Karen living inside your home?